Hi, I'm Tom Martin. I'm the CEO and founder of LawDroid, and we're a company dedicated to helping lawyers supercharge their law firms with the help of AI legal assistants that can help with everything from case law research to analyzing documents to even capturing new leads. The session you're about to watch first aired live at LawDroid's first annual AI conference. One thing I would ask of you is to please keep in touch with us. You can subscribe to lawdroidmanifesto.com, which is a newsletter where I can keep you updated about the latest developments in law and technology, and let you know about great events like this that'll keep you informed and that you can walk away from with actionable intelligence. Stay tuned.
First, we'll do some introductions, and then for the folks that are tuning in, we really want to talk about three main buckets of how generative AI is or can be applied to access to justice. That'll first look like what's happening now in access to justice with respect to generative AI technology. What are some of the challenges? You heard a lot of what's going on from earlier sessions, but what challenges are we seeing specifically with respect to access to justice and folks that can't afford traditional legal services? And then finally, want to do a little bit of prediction and talk about the opportunities that we we see as experts in this field. What are the opportunities for this technology to be applied in this space, and maybe even what we need to do now in order to prepare for that future. So just to kick off the introductions, my name is Amanda Brown. I'm the founder and executive director of Lagniappe Law Lab, and we are a justice technology nonprofit that's focused on the Louisiana civil justice system largely. But in order to make that system work well, I like to look at the whole picture and see everything that's going on. So really appreciate having the opportunity to be kind of an analyst on new and emerging technologies and bring those to the Louisiana civil justice system. So now I'll pass it over to Natalie.
Thanks, Amanda, Tom, and thanks for having us. I'm Natalie Knowlton, founder of Access to Justice Ventures, where I and my partner Chase Hurdle work with companies who are interested in stretching regulatory boundaries. We do business modeling and advice on how to get into the Utah Sandbox and Arizona ABS licensing system. Before that, I was with ILES, which is the Institute for the Advancement of the American Legal System at the University of Denver, where I did a lot of research, mostly qualitative, some quantitative, on the access to justice issue, what it's like being a self-represented litigant, what it's like going through the process. So I'll just note that I'm not a technologist, but it's through that lens of understanding the research of what people who don't have a lawyer need. And that's the perspective that I bring here. Sam.
Hi, everybody. I'm Sam Harden. I am technically a program manager with Pro Bono Net. Pro Bono Net is a national nonprofit that does technology development for legal aids, nonprofits, and state A to J initiatives all across the U.S. Before I worked at Pro Bono Net, I had various roles in legal technology. I worked with Measures for Justice on a data initiative, as well as the Florida Justice Technology Center on tech development. And before that, I practiced law for a number of years, doing litigation in both state and federal court, both civil and criminal.
All right, before we jump in, I did want to just remind everybody, if you have questions, please feel free to drop them into the Q&A portion of the webinar, the Zoom screen. I think Tom will be queuing those up to us after we finish kind of our general conversation. And with that, this is very much intended to be a general conversation. So I'm just gonna, again, loosely moderate and kick us off, and maybe kick it over to Sam to start us off with kind of what your take on your understanding of the applications that are currently being used today in the access to justice sector of the legal profession.
Yeah, thank you. So in access to justice, and I'm based in Florida in Tampa, but I'm actually in Charlotte right now because tomorrow is the start of the Innovations in Technology Conference, which is the big legal aid conference that LSC, the Legal Services Corporation, puts on every year. And AI is the hot topic for this year. As people can probably guess, it's also the hot topic at every other legal conference, as far as I'm aware. Um, and Unfortunately, in the access to justice space, things tend to lag, 6 months to a year behind where large firm and like e-discovery and things like that are technologically. But there's a definite sense of urgency on, how do we actually use this technology? What does this technology actually do? Is it useful? Can our clients use it? Can we use it to help serve our clients? What does it all mean? That kind of thing. Um, as far as practical applications as we sit here right now, I've done a bit of development with OpenAI's models. I'm using their API. I've been very impressed with them, frankly, on what they can do. And, there's still a lot of problems with them. And so I think, for me, a lot of the applications have to do with what I call human in the loop type things, where a human is using the AI, but the human is checking what the AI is doing before that human gets back to their client, especially in legal aid and especially in dealing with vulnerable populations. Um, One big thing in legal aid are things like legal hotlines, where attorneys volunteer to answer the phone and talk through eviction, divorce, domestic violence, vouchers, Medicare claim appeals, anything that people call in about. And attorneys don't have that kind of knowledge off the top of their heads, typically. Some may, but most don't. But using AI, RAG models, retrieval augmented generation models for things like that, I think are very promising. Also in content analysis, a lot of legal aid organizations put out content for people to view and read about their rights, about, different laws that they can use, different kinds of cases, what the processes are like. So, rewording content, into plain language, doing a lot of the unsexy back office stuff that people don't like to do, like, putting things, in topic categorization, summarizing them, synthesizing two documents about the same thing into one. I think those are really good use cases that we should, keep exploring. I know some agencies are exploring these, but I always encourage people to experiment with it in those ways.
I think one thing I failed to do to set us up for the conversation was just for folks that maybe aren't as familiar. When we say access to justice, and maybe you two can validate this for me, our conversation is generally looking at the application of artificial intelligence to more particularly legal aid organizations, and then use by organizations maybe like mine or even directly by the public for accessing the legal system. I think whether we like it or not, the prior conversations that have been had are more so tied to the part of the justice system that's for, businesses and really people that have money to access the legal system. So I just wanted to frame that up because I think when I personally feel there's a huge disparity in the current applications of this technology within that subsection of the legal system versus what we've already heard from prior panelists on how it's being used for private bar and in courts and the practice like that. So I just wanted to level set with that and maybe kick it over to Natalie to share your thoughts on applications and things like that as well.
Sure. Thanks, Amanda. So one of the areas that I've really been focusing a lot of time in terms of use cases and application, and I know this is happening somewhere, and Amanda, I know you're going to talk about the work that you're doing to directly apply this to your services, but I look at the possibilities of content creation. And why is that? Well, we know that self-represented litigants and people who are navigating the system need legal information. Whether they don't want a lawyer or they can't afford a lawyer, they're not going to lawyers. So they need and benefit from legal information, but legal information is not all the same. you have this broad category of legal information, which is the NOLO of the world. What is a divorce? What does it look like? Then you have your more tailored jurisdiction, for example, case type specific. Here's what divorce in Colorado looks like. Then you have your more deployable and accessible and actionable resources, where you have something about divorce in Colorado that tells you steps to take. And so that information architecture is helping you. And then you move over into the realm of legal advice. I think generative AI is getting us further into that realm of really actionable, deployable legal information if providers choose to use it. So some of the use cases that I see, just high level, bringing together and ideating. Megan and Damien talked about this ideation generation, and I think that's incredibly important. I think the ideation component is being overlooked by a lot of people. So we can use these tools to generate types of questions that people might have, because also oftentimes people don't know what questions to ask because they don't know the issues. So we can generate Q&As, we can generate issues of importance. Now, we might think we know what's important, for example, in a divorce case, but let's put it in the framework of the actual person going through the system. What might they think is important? And that might be two different things, but we can use Gen AI to get there. I don't want to go into necessarily all of these, but a couple that I'll just note that I have kind of in my running list of use cases. We talk about meeting litigants where they are, but I think generative AI is really going to make its mark on helping meeting litigants where they are on a reading level and also psychologically. So let's take reading levels. We know that the average reading level is 7th or 8th grade. We know that most legal information websites are not 7th and 8th grade. They're much higher sophistication levels. So we need to translate that into information that people can understand and then take and do something with. So we can use generative AI to simplify. We can use generative AI to come up with definitions that are a little more accessible to people. And then what do I mean by finding people where they are psychologically? So we know, and we have tons of data from the behavioral economics field, that people going through stress process information differently. They hear different things, they see different things, and that impacts almost everything in their life. So we can put content into these tools and have it be a little more reflective, a little more empathetic of the people who are coming to court. One of the things, if you talk to court staff and self-help staff, that they will always say, I don't get this, but people want me to read the information out loud to them. And that's a key piece of that kind of cognitive disconnect that's happening at the time when people are under extreme stress going through the legal system. So a final note, and I know both of you will talk about this, is the ability to diversify content. Not everyone loves long form content. Few people actually can absorb long form content when it relates to a topic that they are not an expert in. So we can translate to video, translate to audio in ways that were unimaginable in the speed that we can access now. So I think I'll stop there because, Amanda, I know you have a ton of concrete examples that you can share that probably interplay with some of that high level.
Yeah, I think to put a gloss on it all, however, I still think the applications that we're seeing are generally just amplifying the functions that we're already doing in the access to justice space. While yes, and this is a revolutionary technology, nobody disputes that. I just think that maybe, as Sam points out, maybe this sector kind of tends to lag behind for whatever reason. I think it's maybe rightfully because we're dealing with removing kind of the intermediary in a lot of the work that we do, where we're producing information for the public or creating resources for people to interact with directly without the assistance, guidance of some third party there to kind of act as a buffer. But with that being said, so I guess with that being said, a lot of the work that we do in justice technology and is educating people, because we're not allowed to give advice. We're not law firms. We're not providing direct legal services. So a lot of that does look like content creation, and this technology, at least for my organization and the work that we do, has really greatly catalyzed how quickly, how well we're able to create content, to diversify the content that we offer. I will say, and maybe it's more appropriate for later in the conversation, but I don't think that we would have been ready to do this if we didn't already have kind of the mental models or frameworks in place that we're applying to the creation of content in general, and then using this technology to layer on top and really expedite that. But generally what I mean is kind of we start with long form content being the basis of everything that we want to create. At its core, whether we like it or not, legal issues are complicated. And if you want comprehensive resources, you have to lean on long form content. That's not to say, though, you can't take that, and we do. We'll, at this point, now we can create a first draft of long form content that fits within our content structure. We can then repurpose that and ask, to write a script, and then we can use that script and use generative AI video software to map our script to scenes for people, and greatly increase how quickly we're able to produce videos, and realistically bring the cost to virtually zero. Whereas in the past, to create a video, it would take months, maybe for a small subset of videos, and tens of thousands of dollars. And we're realistically looking at using the base of what we have from a long form content and turning that into something within 2 hours, a video within 2 hours, and $80 a month, maybe $100 a month for the different subscription services. So I think that has been extremely helpful. And then moving down the scale to things like form creation, just removing that blank page problem for us has been a huge benefit of this technology. And then kind of lastly, tying it back to looking at the other applications, and as they're really just amplifying what's already being done in access to justice space, things like issue spotting, legal issue spotting. I think there's a lot of room for improvement, obviously, on how that's being done. And I'm sure as time goes on, we'll work together as a community to figure that out and incorporate that into the other systems that we're building out. But maybe it's a function of the work that legal aid lawyers and people that don't have lawyers are doing is fundamentally different a lot of times. We're not doing e-discovery. We're not doing these big mining projects. So I think just the application there has kind of it's just lagged behind. Any final comments on that, Sam, Natalie, before we move into issues and challenges? I think this is going to be a robust discussion.
Amanda, I really appreciate your comments about, meeting people where they are, and access to justice. And, I think one of the things that we're going to talk about in a minute is, how people are using it themselves, I think needs to be part of the conversation. A lot of the panels before this had mentioned, are there UPL risks? Florida just came out with an opinion. California is thinking about this. But I think in legal aid, especially, we're dealing with people that are self-helpers. And a lot of times they come to legal aid after trying to help themselves first. So I think that's got to be a huge consideration, is how are people actually using these tools themselves out of our monitoring and out of our control as attorneys.
Yeah, I'll just say that's a great point, Sam. I think about that a lot. There seems to be even more now that courts are getting in this mix, and some courts are restricting SRL's use of generative AI tools. There are so many people out there now saying, well, people shouldn't be using these, and this is not a tool that is helpful to people. And that's not the issue. The issue is they're using these tools. So whether they should or shouldn't is not any issue. Like we can't control that. So I think the question is better, well, they are using these tools, so how can we make sure that what they're using is actually more helpful than less helpful? I think that's the key issue on that front.
Well, I think that's a perfect segue into the broader conversation about issues and challenges. And the only thing I'll comment on with respect to that is just to echo, what Natalie was saying, that Sari mentioned earlier that we had been on this panel together a year ago or more than a year ago, and the takeaway from that was the horse is out of the barn. There's no going back from this. In fact, I think I saw a TikTok from someone where they used ChatGPT to create a letter in order to, I mean, effectively scare whoever their adversary was into complying with their request was. I forget the details, and it actually worked. Whether or not the merits of that were legitimate or not, that's not at issue. The question is whether people are using it, and there's demonstrable kind of stories out there to say that they are, maybe that it works, and that we as the legal system aren't going to stop that. So Sam, what do you have a comment about that?
Yeah, that TikTok is actually one of my favorite videos about this because it's such a great example of, somebody going to ChatGPT and she knew that she needed something that looked like it came from a lawyer to scare her landlord. She knew this was a legal issue, right? And she got a first draft of the letter from ChatGPT and she said, no, make it more lawyer-like or something to that effect. And then, it reiterated on that letter and, it worked for her. It got her the result that she wanted. Was the letter as good as a $500 an hour New York-based attorney or $2,500 an hour New York-based attorney could have written? Probably not. But it did the job for her. The case, it wasn't a legal case, it didn't go to court, but it's clearly a legal issue that she was able to solve. And, I personally, I think that, that example is just the tip of a larger iceberg that we're not seeing. We don't have any information into how many people are going on ChatGPT or going on to Google Bard or Claude or, any of the other publicly available tools and asking it legal questions. One of the big issues in unlicensed practice of law and the difference between the practice of law and legal information is that as lawyers, we've created this giant morass of things where anything and everything can be a legal issue if we want it to be. Did you lose your Medicaid benefits? That can be a legal issue, or it doesn't have to be. Are you on, food stamps and you got denied, your benefits through SNAP or something like that? That's a legal issue if we want it to be. And so if somebody goes on ChatGPT and asks it about SNAP benefits, they're potentially asking it about a legal issue, but we haven't really defined it as such, but it could be. There was a great case, and I say great in the negative sense, a case in Florida called TICD, TIKD, if I remember it correctly, where the Florida Supreme Court looked at a phone app that let people resolve traffic tickets. And, it would get a lawyer for them if they needed a lawyer, that kind of thing. And the Florida Supreme Court said that's unlicensed practice of law because essentially, if you read the opinion, it infringes on the business model of lawyers, is my takeaway from that. And my deep down fear is that bar associations are going to look at this the same way. There's a case that's in history now called Norman Dacey, who wrote a book about how to avoid probate. And he got sanctioned or potentially sanctioned for unlicensed practice of law for writing a book. I don't think bar associations have really changed their views on what is and is not the practice of law. It just depends on how far they want to go in regulating it.
Maybe that's a good opportunity to turn to this question of regulation. I know, Natalie, you always have a lot of thoughts about regulation since that's your day job. And Sam, too, had some examples for California, Florida. I think they were even being circulated in the chat at some point. So do you guys want to give us like a high level view of that with respect to access to justice and what is that going to mean for us, but also for individuals?
Sam, do you want to start?
I was going to let you start, but I can go.
Okay. Well, okay. This is going to change, I think, the way that we regulate lawyers, because it has to change the way we regulate lawyers. The UPL provisions are just unworkable in light of the content that's being created by these tools. And the open source models are absolutely capable of giving legal advice. Now, their legal advice is not the same. So I say that more because the UPL rules are so strict, and less because the technology is fantastic at giving legal advice. But there are certain easy issues that the technology is already able to solve. And Jane pointed out some of the ridiculous ways that we define UPL in the practice of law. Consider the issue of filing deadlines. That's considered the practice of law. That's a simple calculation based on definitions in code. And we, as people who are self-represented, we're not entitled to that information from anyone because that's considered the practice of law. So those types of things, I think, are just going to be blown wide open. And I hope they are, because I think regulators really need to have a serious conversation about what's going on. The challenges related to that, and I think we'll talk about this a little more, are the humans behind it. Humans, in my view, are standing in the way of allowing generative AI to have the most impactful have the most impact on self-represented litigants and those who are going by themselves. It's just, we are not setting the frameworks that we need to for when the technology can provide accurate legal and simple legal advice. I think that's a human issue, not a technology issue.
Yeah, and to me, that the definition of practice of law and what is and is not legal advice is so hazy at this point. It's essentially we know it when we see it kind of test for bar associations and for courts. One experiment that I ran that I found was really interesting is I took an anonymized set of legal questions. It's a set of Reddit posts from the Reddit legal advice, Reddit, whatever you call those on Reddit, and stripped out of identifying information and things like that, and is used to train AI models. And I took the questions from that and fed it through Chat GPT, and then recorded the answers and created a survey and asked legal professionals, simply, is this legal advice or legal information, depending on what you understand that to be. I'm not going to give you a bright line because there isn't one, but based on your understanding, what is this? And many of those responses that the AI generated, a good majority of people rated them as legal advice, even knowing that they were from an AI. They weren't from a person. They weren't from like a notario, which is an immigration and unlicensed practitioner that does a lot of harm in a lot of cases. But legal professionals did rate those as, this is legal advice. One thing that I think about as well is, for a person using an AI model to answer a legal question and to get legal advice, because let's face it, that's what they're doing. We don't have any standards around what should that advice contain. What are the standards there? Should it include a disclaimer? Should it have like actionable steps? Should it have a number that they can call, call your bar hotline, call, this number, call the court and ask them questions? Because we haven't gotten past that, is this or is this not UPL, scare tactic thing yet. And I think we need to get to that point, otherwise we're going to end up just never doing anything. And people are going to continue to use these models to get legal advice, but we're not going to be able to impose any sort of standards on it, even loosely, because we're so scared that it might be UPL.
I feel like an interesting kind of way to slice this discussion is really based around whether people are using widely available tools like OpenAI, ChatGPT, Bard, wherever people are kind of already looking for information online, versus the tools that perhaps we or folks in our sector develop for them. And I think each of those use cases comes with its own set of challenges. At least from my perspective, on the side of the public facing, openly available tools, the access is there 100%. there's the barriers to getting there is so much lower. People, you don't need to think, oh, I have a legal problem, I'm going to go hunt and search for this specific legal tool. I'm just going to go ask this question and see what kind of result I can get. And I think at the end of the day, people just want results. They don't care how they get there. So I think that's something that we have to reckon with, and perhaps as a as a niche within the overall legal profession, think about, okay, are we really going to invest a lot of effort into creating additional point solutions that do use the technology, give us a lot more control over that output? Or are we going to be able to collectively go and say, oh, we all came to an agreement on this set of standards, and we work with you, OpenAI, or generative AI gods, can we make this workable for folks? Because at the end of the day, I think I saw in the comments, Jordan said, you can blow out a candle, but you can't blow out a fire. And that's pretty much where we are with the adoption of it from the public with the large scale tools. I don't know if we can realistically go back to doing the individualized things very effectively. I'm not saying that there's not room for those, maybe in like more complex matters, but we have to have this conversation as an ecosystem. Like, what is it that what do we believe? What do we value? What do we actually want to accomplish here? And can we work together systemically to make that a reality for people? Because I just, we've been struggling with getting people to adopt legal technology tools that aren't AI, that have taken immense resources, talent, brain power, and there's just a discoverability problem. People can't find it. And if I know that I'm going to get some coherent answer out of a chatbot on the internet, I'm going to go there first. So it's just, there are so many different threads, I think, that we could pull on there.
Yeah, and Amanda,
No, go
go
ahead.
ahead. Just to riff on that point, I think you're exactly right. People are going to use what they have access to. They're not going to go and search out a legal specific AI tool that exists on, like a court's website that's 4 pages deep, in my opinion. They're going to go to Google. Google right now, in our world, Google is the default triage system for people with legal issues. That's the first place they go, is Google. They put in their problem, they get answers. Google has indicated that they're going to move search in a generative fashion. It's not clear how far that's going to go. Microsoft already did go full generative search with Bing, but a very small percentage of people actually use Bing because everyone uses Google. So when people talk about, well, we just need a legal specific model that's trained on for people to use, my question has always been, who is going to use that? How are they going to get there? Because Google exists, Chat GPT exists. That's easier to use and easier to find. It's well marketed. They have billions of dollars in marketing budget probably, and that's what the default is. So I think we need to think about, how are people using those default products? Do we really need to replicate a default product that people are already using and see a very small number of people use it? Or is there a better solution that we can come to? Another thing that kind of gets my goat when we talk about self-represented people using, OpenAI or ChatGPT or whatever is, the idea that they should be, engineering their prompts, to, do, whatever it is. We should not really be expecting people with an immediate legal need to be a prompt engineer. That's just unworkable to me. If you go on, YouTube and Google and search prompt engineering, you can find out how to make 100 grand every month as a prompt engineer. I haven't done that. It does seem lucrative. But we shouldn't be expecting that. We should be thinking about ways that people can use these tools without having to be a legal expert, because that's not the point, right?
And I'll build on that just in terms of Margaret Hagan has done incredible research in how users use the internet and what their process flow is. And I've done research with self-represented litigants and how they prepare for a court case, and many others have as well. I think there's this vision of a litigant getting on ChatGPT and asking a legal question and then going off to court, and that's it. Armed with only what they have from the answer. But most people in the research realm, at least from we've found, most people are actually doing considerable research. That's one point of reference that they use to gain information, orientation, strategy. They're also looking at other sites. They're going to the court website in some instances. People generally find authoritative sources to be more trustworthy than just random blogs on the internet. So this kind of terror show of litigants just asking ChatGPT and then going off and destroying their entire case, I think doesn't entirely align with the behavior that we understand people to have when they have a legal issue.
Yeah, I think we probably have to all come to a better understanding of what people's actual justice journeys are. What does that full end-to-end experience look like of someone interacting with the justice system? That would require us to do a lot of research, a lot of documenting, but then giving us the opportunity to look for leverage points in that, and maybe inject some of this, or help us answer those questions. I think one thing, Sam, that you said about the prompt engineering aspect is earlier when I was kind of alluding to, it is such a struggle, right? To which one of these modalities is the best. On the one hand, we can't expect people to be prompt engineers because you don't know what you don't know. And when you go to a site like ChatGPT and just kind of blindly type in information, or a description of your issue or whatever, and try and get some type of output, there is definitely an opportunity to miss a lot of that. But then with point or more legal specific tools, that lets us build in our own expertise into that. So I honestly don't know what the right version of that is. If I had to guess, and unfortunately for all of us, it's some combination of both of them. That means we have to do double the work on this. But I think if we're true to that no wrong door approach of access to justice, we have to be considerate that people are accessing and coming into the system at different points, and we need to be prepared to integrate those experiences, and make sure we get people those results. I think, unless you guys have something else, do we want to shift gears and go ahead and talk about the opportunities that we have here for the future?
Sounds great.
Well, why don't you kick us off, Natalie?
All right. I have a few. They might make some of the audience members recoil, but nevertheless, these are my dreams. So I think we have to come from the assumption, and I'm not going to predict what's going to happen in the future, but we have to come at the assumption that the technology will really only get better, maybe not in a linear fashion and maybe not across different tools, but technology is going to increase. And I think we've already seen that. So I think we can expect more of that. So that being said, my dreams for this are unmediated tools for consumers. So direct to consumer technologies that allow them to get questions and advice and strategies so that they can actually move through the legal system, whether or not they can afford a lawyer. I'm fine with someone having money, wanting to go the technology route because they, for whatever reason, don't want to bring in counsel. So I think that is in the future, and I hope so. I also believe that this technology can help the knowledge gap. So think about employment handbooks or other insurance policies. I think then there are already people out there today that are doing and offering these kinds of services so that consumers can more easily understand the agreements that they're getting into, their rights and responsibilities. We know that people often don't think that what they're experiencing is a legal issue. I think these tools can help when inserted into a more upstream kind of flow where they're, where they're not yet at a legal problem, but understand that these issues do have legal ramifications. I think and hope that AI used in judging is going to increase. We talk about bias in AI, but the reason AI is biased is because humans are biased. We can't take the bias out of humans. Implicit bias training is a great tiny bit, but that doesn't remove the inherent bias that we have as humans. We know that judges are making decisions based on factors that even they don't think they're making decisions based on. So to the extent that maybe this technology will allow us to remove bias, I know a lot of work has been done on this. I think that we can actually achieve a more equitable and fair justice system in some instances where it's appropriate. So I'll stop there. Sam?
Yeah, so when I think about future opportunities, I try and think about it from the perspective of the user, right? The person in need actually going to use the tools. And I think, right now, people have to go to ChatGPT, they have to go to Bard, they have to, do that sort of thing. I think we're going to start seeing more and more integrations into everyday tools that people use, like Gmail, like, Google Docs, like Microsoft Word, like Google Search, things like that. And even into, like filling out a form on a website. If you use the program Notion, to, keep track of things, it's kind of like a to-do list, on steroids. Notion has started integrating AI into it where you can say, like, help me write this, and it'll help you do that. I think we're going to see more and more of this for people to take advantage of. And I think that's what, people are going to be using instead of going to, a chat bot on a website like ChatGPT. I also think about, the multimodal approach that, companies are rolling out now. Google has a new model. OpenAI has a new model where Dr. Megan Ma gave the example earlier of someone taking a photo of a really complicated parking sign and saying, what does this mean? And it coming back with a coherent answer. I would like to see programs where somebody can take a picture of their notice to appear in family court or their notice to appear in criminal court and saying, what is this? Help me understand this. And the model being able to say, this is what this is. This is the kind of case that you probably have. These are the next steps that you need to take. I think that would be a huge leap forward because, the information gap there when people get something from the court is so large. I'd also like to see some kind of useful voice interface that people can use. To me, voice interfaces are the most frustrating form of interfaces, mostly because I have small kids that yell at it and they're always making noise. But I would love to be able to see, something that you can actually have a verbal dialogue with in the future, and I think that's coming. The last thing I'll say is, I think we can start looking at intersectional issues with legal problems. Right now on legal aid, they tend to do a downward funnel to a specific issue, right? Like you start broad and go down small to eviction or something like that. But with these new models, I'd like to see them be able to connect, across problem areas, because a person that's, experiencing eviction and potentially might become homeless also is at risk for a ton of other factors that, don't necessarily get factored into the equation when they're just looking for help for one singular issue. And that's all that legal aid has the ability to provide, mainly not because they don't want to, but because they're very limited on staff time and funding. And I'd like to see, models be able to recognize that. And I think, like in a few years, they'll be able to handle that pretty well.
Yeah, I think to jump in, I would just reiterate what Natalie said, and perhaps to some extent what Jordan mentioned in the keynotes. We can only really expect this to get better, and it's already pretty good. I actually ran a group exercise with probably about 60 or 70 public interest attorneys in Louisiana at a state conference that we had. Asked them to create a ChatGPT account and match one of a legal task with a subject area and created a short prompt to basically help them produce some type of output, whether that might be, give me negotiation strategies for arguing with my landlord on making repairs to my home, and or create a legal document for a succession in Louisiana. And while of course there were errors there, people were extremely impressed, and I think the general consensus on that, whether they expected to leave there with that take, was that if you're someone that doesn't have a lawyer, this is pretty damn good. It's not perfect. We don't necessarily want people to be doing that, but as was noted earlier, desperation kind of results in utility like this. So, but we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater just because it's not perfect. This is only going to get better over time. And I think that we are going to be able to harness this in this space to help attorneys do those tasks. I also see more so, this is a little different take. I'd like to see the application of this in more of a diagnostic or sort of in a risk detection manner. So maybe the solution or some version of that looks like, if you are looking on ChatGPT or Google or looking for information, you might get a flag that says, hey, this could potentially be a legal issue. Here's a resource, or go call this person. And just to flag issues for folks to do a little deeper dive on it, because they might not realize that it's a legal issue at all. And then I think even too, this is going to maybe be a little bit controversial, but if financial institutions and banking institutions and Amazon and all these, private companies can be so invasive of our privacy, what within reason is there that we can do to help maybe raise flags for people that are at risk for financial legal issues? Like, is there something there that we can, of course, with permission, use data and use artificial intelligence to flag potential legal issues for people, so that they, as a preventative measure, so that they don't get further and further into the hole of debt collection and bankruptcy, and look for ways that we can integrate with the systems that people already use to flag potential problems for them before they are exacerbated. And then I think the last thing I'll comment on is I see from other actually other areas of practice outside of the legal system, there are a lot of interesting applications out there dealing with kind of data warehousing analysis that lets you interact with the data that you have very, very easily and coherently. And I think if we, as a system, do the work that we need to do to kind of align our taxonomies and produce data and use some of those tools, we can make better cases for policy or practice-based solutions. So that's kind of a different take on that. But I think that's all the time that we have. We'll invite Tom back up here to maybe moderate a couple questions for us before we leave.
Hey there. Great discussion, guys. So there's a couple of questions that I want to throw at you because we do have limited time, but the first one has to do with, Maya Markovic brought up the idea of certification for direct-to-consumer access to justice solutions. So number one, do you think that's a good idea? And number two, what would that look like?
I can take that, Amanda and Natalie, if that's cool. I've actually done some thinking about this, like, what kind of standards would we impose and how would we impose them? When I ran a study with legal professionals that was separate from the is this advice or information one, on rating answers that GPTs came back with. I was able to kind of tease out a couple of things that were common across what people thought were good answers. Requiring a disclaimer when it identifies a legal issue, that this is, it's not created by a lawyer, you should get legal advice. Being able to generate actionable next steps was a big one. People seem to like that model would say like, I'm not entirely sure, but like leaving some room for uncertainty, not giving a completely definitive answer, but giving a good bit of guidance. On top of that, I think, if somebody's doing something like a chatbot, that answers legal questions, they should disclose what model they're using and what kind of prompting goes on behind the scenes. We don't want things where, the prompting is tilting the tables in a specific way. For example, there have been instances of that where models recommend a specific medication for people because the prompting is telling it to, and, it's not marketed as a, hey, recommend, like this medication, but, and then how do we enforce that is the big question. Some sort of liability shield. If the company is sued by the person using it, they can say we met these standards and we therefore met the prevailing standard of care or something like that. But, it's something that I think we need to definitely consider.
So one other that I'll throw out there, it comes from Anonymous, but the idea is, when people use Google Maps to get somewhere and it's leading to like a dead end, it like goes into a lake or something, but people insist on, Google must be right somehow. Like, how do we deal with that situation when it comes to consumers using generative AI solutions where maybe they're at the point where they just don't believe that maybe the lawyer is correct, right? And they have this thing in hand and they think that it's right. Like, the question was, how do we deal with that situation?
I'll just remark that there's a good chance that consumers now think their lawyer is wrong and is not doing the right job and is not keying into issues. I think that's kind of a hallmark of being someone with a legal problem. But on top of that, I'll let Sam and Amanda comment.
Yeah, I guess I would say maybe I'm not fully understanding the question, but I think it's not UPL if I'm practicing law for myself, right? I'm just self-representing. So if I have an attorney and I disagree with them, like it's my right to not follow that advice, but you just deal with the consequences of that if the outcome is unfavorable. So I'm not I don't know that it's that big of an issue that we should be concerned about, because people are at the end of the day going to make their own judgment calls anyway.
And I'm actually seeing the question, and the second part, how do you encourage clients to get better advice? I actually think consumers are very keyed into the level of services that they're engaging in, whether it's a lawyer or a technology. I think they understand. They have the freedom to choose an inferior product, which might be online as opposed to legal advice. So I think that's part of the answer to that. And the other part is also that lawyers' value proposition is really not clear in the eyes of many people based on costs and based on other factors. They can tend to aggravate, for example, in the domestic relations case, what the family is going through. So I think that lawyers really need to think through in this new age of technology and evolution of practice what their value proposition is and how they can get that in front of consumers in a way that resonates with them.
I completely agree. And so much of it comes down to consumer choice, which has been lacking in this area for a long time. So with that, I just want to thank you all for giving us some amazing insight into access to justice, where it's going, and what we can look forward to. So thank you, Natalie. Thanks, Sam. Thanks, Amanda. And everyone else, we're going to come back at 12:30. So we're going to have a break for about 40 minutes. And that way you can get something to eat. And we'll come back with the vendor lightning talks at 12:30. See you then. That was another great session from LawDroid's first annual AI conference. Thank you so much for watching. Please keep in touch. Subscribe at lawdroidmanifesto.com, where I can keep you updated about the latest developments at the intersection of law and technology, and let you know about great events like this. Keep in touch.